Welcome to Dateline Health. This is Fred Lippman coming to you from Nova Southeastern University. And often we talk about all kinds of health and disease and cures and surgical issues, but every once in a while we want to talk about the health of our community. And today we're going to talk about a subject matter that I believe relates to the health of not only our community but to our society, and that's human smuggling and trafficking. And we have excellent people here, experts that are here today, and let me introduce them. First, we have Victor Williams, who's sitting in front of me, who's a special agent with a whole group of groups, with ICE and Homeland Security, et cetera, et cetera. Welcome, Victor.
Thank you.
Good. We're going to explain to everybody all of the agencies that you're involved in. But he's a very special person and a very special agent with those universities. And Maria Rodriguez,
Yes.
correct?
Correct.
Right. That's what happens when you get married right away, you add another name. Anyway, Maria is the director of Project Gold and has been with Christie House. I guess you're the executive director of Christie House?
Just the director for Project Gold.
Director for Project Gold. Okay, welcome.
Thank you.
May I call you Maria?
Yes.
Thank you. Special Agent Williams, we've been talking before the show. You are a long-standing public servant, and I congratulated you before the show, and I'll say it to our viewers. Thank you for keeping our community safe, our wonderful country, United States, safe by all your service in the military, and now with 2 units that are involved. Everybody knows about the Homeland Security issues. So let's talk about what your acronyms are after your name.
Okay.
Tell me who you are.
So my name is Victor Williams. I'm a special agent with the Department of Homeland Security Investigations. So let's explain this. So you have the Department of Homeland Security that came about after the horrific events in 2001. And under Homeland Security, you have Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE. Under ICE, you have Homeland Security Investigations. HSI. HSI is the investigative arm for the Department of Homeland Security, like FBI is for Department of Justice.
Right. Well, let's talk a bit, just not about the work that you do, but because human smuggling and trafficking is a horrific, I believe, curse on our society. And let's try to place into the minds, what is human trafficking and smuggling?
Okay, so human trafficking, the difference between human trafficking and human smuggling, which people confuse sometimes. Human smuggling, crime against the border, it's voluntarily. I pay someone to smuggle me across the border, I'm free to go. Human trafficking can also start as voluntarily, but it becomes involuntarily, meaning that I pay someone to smuggle me across the border and they exploit me. So to make it very simple, when we're talking human smuggling, human trafficking, we're talking crime against the border, human smuggling, crime against the person, human trafficking.
Right. And when we find these individuals, because you have many people that are involved with your investigations, everything from undercover agents to specialty people, experts in the field, like I said, your element of service is not much different than what the FBI does to protect us from criminal elements and arson and things of that nature in the United States. So when you find these individuals who are trafficked, I would assume they are in situations which are untenable.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because when you ask most people about human trafficking, and the first thing they say, where are the people coming from? What country do you find the majority of the victims coming from? And I have to tell them the majority of the victims that we have in trafficking situations in the United States are U.S. citizens. We do have people that are brought here from different countries that are trafficked, but again, the majority of people that are trafficked in the United States are United States citizens.
That is something which I'm glad that you explained that, but I've been reading a bit of the information recently, and I was really surprised myself because I guess I'm influenced by a lot of the things that you read in newspapers and dominantly you see on television. And of course, this is political season, and you hear a lot of people saying a lot of things which not necessarily are accurate.
Yes.
All right, and that's all I'm going to say. And that's on both sides of the spectrum.
Right.
But it's very important because that one fact to me was new to my mind, and I think it's a very important fact for the viewers to understand. It's really very interesting. Maria, may I talk with you?
Of course.
Okay. Maria, tell me about Christie House.
Christie House is a nonprofit organization that provides services to sexually abused children and to child victims of sex trafficking. Our trafficking program, Christie House has been around for 20 years, but we started Project Goal, which stands for Girls Owning Their Lives and Dreams, which is our trafficking program, which started about 8 years ago to serve domestic children in our community who were being trafficked. And as Victor mentioned, many people think of trafficking as victims brought into the United States. So there were services available to those victims, but there was no services available at the time for domestic children in our community. So we decided to create a specialized program that will address the needs of these children. Back in 8 years ago, before we started the program, these are kids that are coming through our schools. They may be living at home, they may be in a foster home, in a shelter, they're coming through social services, they may be coming through hospitals, through law enforcement, through the juvenile detention system, through the dependency system, but they were not being identified as victims of trafficking. Very often they were seen as delinquent children, being arrested for prostitution, thrown in jail, but not receiving any services. So there has been a lot of changes in the Florida law, and our former executive director, Trudy Novicki, initiated some of those changes with the Safe Harbor Act in the state of Florida to ensure that these children will be receiving services as opposed to jail sentences. It is at the discretion of law enforcement, and we work very closely with law enforcement to make sure that these children are appropriately identified as victims and that they're being referred to different nonprofit organizations to receive their services so that they can heal from the trauma that they have experienced. And it's very important to understand that because many people, again, think that the children are being just abducted, kidnapped, thrown into a room, they have no way out, and they don't realize that many of our children in the strip clubs in Miami-Dade County, in Broward, many of our children may be massage parlors, or they may be being sold on the internet. And some of them may not appear as children, they may look as adults, but the FBI has estimated in the past that 50% of girls in massage parlors and in strip clubs are underage girls. And most of the girls that I have in my program are girls that have been forced to work in strip clubs in South Florida, in our area. So these are kids, again, that may be going to school, they may be living at home with their families, but they're being trafficked by someone. And they may be being trafficked a mile away from home. And not to say the situations from kidnapping and abduction don't take place, but most of the cases, these are children that are being lured into the sex industry. They're being manipulated by someone who comes across as very charming and who offers them love, attention, affection, provides for them, and they trust this person. And then later on, they find themselves in situations where they're being sold. A lot of these traffickers use violence. They can be very violent, and they use violence to make the children compliant. So it is so important to talk about this, because when people see someone dancing at a strip club, or they see that person standing in that corner at 3 a.m. in areas where street prostitution is taking place, or they see those ads online, just because the physical chains are not there, it doesn't mean that the psychological chains are not there. And they're seeing that person, but they're not seeing that they're being watched, that they're being supervised to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing by their traffickers. And it's important that we change that mentality of thinking that our trafficking victims are only behind closed doors and no one can ever see them. they're very much out there in our community, and we need to be able to identify them.
Let me just get this. I'm going to throw this back to Special Agent Williams.
Let's go back and let's start here. Let's define what human trafficking is. So human trafficking, there are three words that are very important. There's, wow, how did I forget that? But no, there's three words. There's force, fraud, and coercion are the three elements of trafficking, unless you're under the age of 18.
Right.
And that's, for instance, any person under age, especially in the sexual exploitation area. You know, if you're under the age of 18, you are considered a victim. If you're over the age of 18, I have to prove those elements of force, fraud, or coercion. So when we talk about human trafficking, the majority of people do talk about the sexual exploitation, but there is a whole community of labor trafficking, servitude, that are very difficult cases to make that we haven't even touched. And experts do say that those cases are probably a lot higher, but we don't see them because they're very difficult to locate and to identify and to make.
No, the reason I'm saying that is in talking to other law enforcement individuals locally, they're saying that particularly in what I would call the agribusiness areas of the nation, not necessarily Florida, but in the nation, in the areas where there are manufacturing or component manufacturing, there is a great deal of, people would call them undocumented aliens, but a lot of these people are brought to that situation by trafficking.
Well, let's say, I would say it's kind of like this. A lot of people come to this country, and especially when we're looking at labor trafficking. Now, I would guess the majority of people that are labor trafficked are people from other countries, because part of them being undocumented is used against them. For instance, say you work in a restaurant, and someone may exploit half your money. Maybe your boss is not paying you a fair wage and making you work long hours. Maybe one of your colleagues is taking half your money, or they're going to turn you into immigration if they don't do that. So part of exploiting those people are part of keeping them, not giving them proper information, because what they don't know is that that is against the law, and if those people were to come forward, the law would protect them. Homeland Security is concerned about people being exploited because of their issues of being undocumented. We mainly focus now on people who are in this country that are undocumented, committing crimes. That's, there's a priority. But in the sense of labor trafficking, if those people knew that they have rights and that they have protection under the law, if those things are happening to them, maybe they would come forward. But if I'm a trafficker, I'm not going to tell you that, going to Homeland Security, you actually you get protection. I'm going to keep you in the dark so I can continue to exploit you.
Yes, in other words, in essence, when you say servitude, which is many folks may not recognize the word servitude, although we have a very bright viewing audience, but servitude is another word for slaving.
Right, and it's a different situation. There's a lot of countries that have servants, and they may bring those servants to the U.S. legally, but when you bring people to the U.S., there's certain laws that they have to meet. They have to get fair wages. They have to be treated properly. So if you lived in another country where you didn't have to pay your servant, or they had to sleep on the floor, or they ate, dog food, you can't do that to human beings here in the United States. So when you bring your servants here, you have to treat them accordingly. And a lot of times they don't. We've gotten calls of an elderly lady is only seen at night when she's taking the trash out or taking a shower in the backyard by water hose. And so going back a little bit to what Maria was saying, when I do my presentations, I tell people identify what human trafficking is. I let you know what it is, but to fix this problem, you really have to change your culture and the way we've been dealing with this issue. Going back to the sexual exploitation, I usually say in my presentations that America has had a love-hate relationship with prostitution and pimp. We have MTV, Pimp My Car, Pimp My House. We've known about this for years, and we've kind of like accepted it. Some people dress as prostitutes or pimps during Halloween. You know, we've accepted this attitude. Guys have a bachelor party. Who do we have come to the bachelor party? So it's been one of those things that's been woven in our communities, in some areas accepted, but we don't want our kids to be that. So we have to change that whole mentality of thought. So when the laws came out about human trafficking in the year 2000, and around 2007, 2008, we realized that this is an epidemic, and it can happen to anyone. It's not just the kids that are in vulnerable situations. Doctors, lawyers, police officers, every kid that walks out the door is vulnerable to the world if they've not been prepared to deal with it. You know, so I tell kids when I do this presentation, we live in a different world. We may be a little bit smarter, technology, smarter, but I don't know if we're safer. And so you have to educate your kids about these issues. You know, we go back to basics. Don't talk to strangers. Don't get in cars with people you don't know. Because, these are vulnerabilities that situations that kids put themselves in. And the next thing you know, they caught up. And while we're in Fort Lauderdale, I'll give you a Fort Lauderdale statistic. Out of the 66 kids that Fort Lauderdale found in a trafficking situation last year or so, 54 of them were community kids. Not the kids at risk. 54 of them out of the 66 were community kids. That's kind of like our kids. Traffickers do not care where they get their victims from. They recruit kids to recruit other kids in schools, looking for those kids that are kind of vulnerable, loners, get them in a compromising situation where it may embarrass in the family, so they're exploited. So it can go way beyond, just those kids that are vulnerable. Yeah, they may be, the most vulnerable, but they address everybody. No one is safe from this issue.
Christie House has been around for a long time. They've been a unifying force with victims, trying to bring them back to their families and actually work with the families, because the families a lot of time act with, not purposely, but without knowledge as to why these things have happened. I know you've been very successful. You want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a lot of the clients that we do have, and Victor addressed something very important, that any child can be at risk. It can happen to any kid, and I've seen all the cases from children that come from supportive, loving home environments, but we have to think about what are that child's individual vulnerabilities that maybe led them to those situations. But a lot of the girls that I have in my program, and we actually have a partnership with another organization called Survivor Pathways, and they provide all the mentoring and services for the LGBTQI community. So they specialize on working with boys, specifically so transgender, non-conforming gender boys. So every boy that we get, so if he meets that criteria, they're sent over to Survivor Pathways to receive the mentoring there. One of the things that we realize that it's so important for these children that are being exploited, whether they're boys or girls, is that they're very often seeking love. They're very often seeking that strong connection and that relationship with someone. And it's important that any agency that is providing services to these children, besides, of course, evidence-based treatment, mentoring, different programmings to keep the children engaged, it's also to provide them with an environment where they feel support, where they feel loved. These kids very often, once they come into the radar, because they have been victimized, a lot of times they get stigmatized, they get labeled, they get mistreated because of being judged by others, and because of how our culture and our society views prostitution, and not understanding the issue as it is, not understanding that these kids are being forced, manipulated, coerced into that industry. So they see that as, well, these are kids that are making that choice, so they're bad kids. and why are they making those bad choices? Again, not understanding the issue, and that's why it's so important for us to talk about what it is, what it looks like, and giving those children a sense of that safety and that environment where they're not being judged. It's very, very difficult sometimes for families, and some of these kids may come from, again, loving home environments. Some of these kids may be in the foster care system, and some of these kids may come from very dysfunctional home environments. We see a lot of runaway youth as well, and we have to understand that most children are not running away because they think the streets are better. Most children are running away from domestic violence, sexual abuse, physical abuse in their homes. And a lot of the girls that we work with, most of them had experienced sexual abuse at a younger age when they were younger children. So you're dealing with complex trauma. You're dealing with the trauma from the sexual abuse in the past or other vulnerabilities. And then you're adding the trafficking, which of course that's creating so much more trauma for these children. So the kids are very challenging to work with. Some of the kids they don't trust people, they don't trust us, may not trust law enforcement, so it takes a while to build those relationships. It's very difficult for law enforcement sometimes to investigate the cases because the children are not willing to testify against their traffickers. They are afraid, they're terrified, but also there is the trauma bonding, which in many cases, those situations of abuse started with someone offering them love, attention, and affection. And it's very similar to what happens with domestic violence victims, where these kids keep hoping for that time where everything was great and everything went smoothly, and they keep hoping that things are going to go back to that and that the violence is going to cease. So they keep going back to their traffickers. So it makes our work more challenging to engage them into services, to have them consistently receiving the therapy that they need and all the programming. So what we try to do at the drop-in center, we have a drop-in center, which is a home. They don't live there, but we pick them up every day, bring them to the drop-in center, and have them participate in different groups. So we have art therapy, we have a trauma group, which is called My Life, so they can address some of their symptoms of trauma. We have a survival-led group, we have mentoring programs, we have cooking and baking, life skills, sex and health and education as well, because it's important for them to understand that as well. And more importantly, teaching them the life skills that they haven't learned because they have been in trafficking situations, or they're being behind school because they've been running away, or they've been missing school, skipping classes. So they may be very behind. So we try to help them with tutoring and trying to make sure that we're really providing comprehensive services and addressing all their needs.
Thank you. Victor Williams, I think one of the most significant, we're down to the last 4 minutes of the show, so there's so much more to talk about, but I think one of the most important things for us to bring to our audience that is seeking some interest relative to their health, and I'm talking about the health of the community now, is the fact that you brought to us about the percentage of domestic individuals.
We get our information from Polaris. Is an organization that runs our Human Trafficking Resource Center out of Washington, D.C.
Right.
They base their numbers on calls that they get. So the calls that they get, which are a lot, is not half, the information, because the calls they don't get is more than what they do receive. So really, in educating the public, and I'll give this number real quick, 888-3737-888, Polaris. You can Google them. You can really find out the statistics that are happening in your city, your state, your country. Florida is the #3 state in the country. Miami is the #2 city in the country for trafficking young girls. So you're right, we could go another hour really talking about the details, but I think people need to know, to excite this change and resolve this problem, we really got to start looking within and asking ourselves, not judging what we see, because we don't get to see the force, fraud, or coercion that's happening in people's head. We just see someone walking around free, and we think they're making decisions. So I would suggest they Google Polaris. I'm also the coordinator for the South Florida Human Trafficking Task Force. This is how we address it. It's a community problem. So it's going to take the community to resolve it. The majority of people that are part of my task force are people who service victims. We need them. They think these victims are coming from other countries. They think are the kids that are in vulnerable situations or in low income. But no, it's happening. I've had police officers whose kids were trafficked, doctors. So every family has to educate and be aware of this. And although we're not going to resolve it 100%, we can stop this from being the fastest growing crime in the world. And we can change the statistics that are happening in Florida and the country.
Okay, well, we're down to the last few seconds of this show. Not a few seconds, a little bit more. We'll go over a little bit, it's okay. But I wanted to thank you, Maria Rodriguez, for your incredible advocacy and your kindness dealing with victims of trafficking. I know that Christie House has a wonderful record of doing the right things for the right purposes, and thank you very much. And especially since you're a Nova Southeastern graduate, I can thank you for that too. Not because you decided to come here for just an education, but you came here to give yourself greater tools to be able to deal with your job. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And Victor Williams, Special Agent with Homeland Security and all the other entities, ICE. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your, people don't know it, but we discussed it, for your well over 30 years of service to this country in the Coast Guard and now with ICE and with Homeland Security. I want to thank you for these viewers out here for helping us to protect this wonderful country called the United States of America. So we thank you very much, and we thank you for your interest and your advocacy, and we will have you back, all right?
Thank you. It's been a pleasure and an honor serving.
Well, thank you. Thank you very, very much. Folks, again, this is not the normal discussion about heart disease, cancer, surgery, etc., but I always feel that at least twice a year I want to do a show about the health care of our community, and this is so timely. And we have two people here that are wonderful experts, practitioners of doing what's right in the field of trafficking and human smuggling. So I hope that you take it seriously and recognize that we're not presenting anything more than what they just said. So as I always tell you, take good care of yourself. But in this case, I want to listen to what Victor Williams said, and that is be due diligent. Recognize that there is a problem. You want to know something about it, just don't get it from a 3-second or 30-second soundbite that you hear on television. But look into it if you wish. But we have wonderful people like Maria and Victor working in the field, particularly Victor, in trying to keep us safe. So thank you both very, very much. Remember, this show is called Dateline Health. We come to you from Nova Southeastern University. And until next time, this is Fred Lippman saying, see you.